1 month into his new assignment, Officer Morrison stood in front of the Metro City homeless shelter at 5:45 a.m., his pressed uniform feeling strangely uncomfortable. His body camera blinked steadily on his chest, recording every moment of his day, just as it had for the past 30 days. "Morning, Officer Morrison," said Miss Betty, the shelter's elderly coordinator. When he first started, she'd watched him like a hawk, not trusting the cop who'd harassed homeless people for years. Now she handed him a cup of coffee with a slight smile. "Good morning, Miss Betty," Morrison replied, his voice softer than it used to be. The past month had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. Inside the shelter, people were waking up. Morrison remembered his first day here, how residents had shrunk away from him in fear, some even leaving their breakfast behind when he entered the room. Today, a few nodded at him, while others continued their morning routines without panic. His radio crackled. "Officer Morrison, this is Commissioner Washington. Remember, you have youth mentoring at 2 p.m. and your evening apology meeting at 7. "Understood, Commissioner," he responded, checking his accountability app. Today's apology would be to the Thompson family, the young man he'd wrongly arrested at the bus stop. His stomach tightened at the thought. By noon, Morrison had helped serve breakfast, assisted 3 homeless veterans with housing applications, and broken up a minor dispute without using force, something that surprised even him. His body camera recorded it all. At 2 p.m. sharp, he arrived at the Metro Youth Center, the same place where he'd slapped Dr. Washington just a month ago. The memory made him wince. Officer Morrison called out Dander, a 14-year-old who'd been assigned as his first mentee. "I got a B+ on my math test." A month ago, Morrison would have ignored the boy's achievement. Now, he found himself genuinely smiling. "That's great work, Dander. See, those extra study sessions paid off." The youth center was filled with kids from the neighborhood. Morrison remembered how he used to view them as potential troublemakers. Now he knew their names, their struggles, their dreams. Commissioner Washington walked in during the homework session, observing silently from the doorway. She watched as Morrison patiently helped a group of students with their assignments, his demeanor completely different from the angry officer she'd first encountered. "Officer Morrison," she called out after the session. "Walk with me." They stepped outside into the afternoon sun. Morrison noticed she no longer had any trace of the bruise he'd given her, but the memory still filled him with shame. "I've been reviewing your progress," Dr. Washington said, pulling out her tablet. "The shelter reports positive interactions. The youth center says attendance has actually increased, and your body camera footage shows significant improvement in your communication style." Morrison nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "However," she continued, "tonight's apology meeting will be your biggest test yet. The Thompson family has agreed to hear you out. This time, I need more than just words, Officer Morrison. I need you to show them how you've changed." At 7 p.m., Morrison sat across from Marcus Thompson and his family in the commissioner's office. His hands were sweating, his mouth dry. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "a year ago, I arrested you for no reason except my own prejudice. I ruined your job prospects, hurt your family, and worst of all, I never saw you as a human being." The words came from a place of truth he hadn't known existed within him. He told them about his month at the shelter, about working with kids like Marcus's younger brother, about finally understanding the damage he'd caused. Commissioner Washington watched the scene unfold, noting how Morrison's body language had changed from defensive to genuinely remorseful. The Thompson family, initially tense, began to relax as Morrison spoke from his heart. "I can't undo what I did," Morrison concluded, "but I can promise you this: I'm not the same officer who arrested you, and I never will be again." After the Thompsons left, Dr. Washington called Morrison back to her office. "That was real progress, officer," she said. "But remember, tomorrow starts another day of proving yourself. Real change isn't about one moment, it's about every moment after." Morrison nodded, understanding for the first time that this wasn't just a program he needed to complete. It was becoming the person he should have been all along. Marcus stood at the front door, waiting for a response to his knock. After 30 seconds of silence, he knocked again, louder this time. The house remained quiet, but he could sense movement inside, the slight creak of floorboards, the whisper of hushed voices. "Police department," he called out, his voice firm but calm. Please open the door." While waiting, his mind drifted back to that terrible day 12 years ago. It had been a Sunday morning, much like today. He had come home from a long night shift, expecting to find his 3-year-old daughter Jasmine running to greet him as she always did. Instead, he found an empty house and a note from Sarah. The memory was still sharp enough to hurt. Asterisk, "I can't do this anymore, Marcus. Your job always comes first. Jasmine needs a father who's there for her, not just a badge and a uniform. By the time you read this, we'll be gone. Don't try to find us." Asterisk, he had tried, of course. He'd used every resource available to him as a police officer. He'd hired private investigators, contacted Sarah's relatives, and searched social media. But Sarah had planned well. She closed their joint bank account, changed her phone number, and disappeared without a trace. Even her parents claimed they didn't know where she'd gone. A sound from inside the house pulled Marcus back to the present. He'd heard shuffling feet approaching the door. "Who is it?" A woman's voice called out, sounding nervous. "Detective Marcus Thompson, ma'am. I need to speak with you regarding a welfare check." The door opened slightly, held by a security chain. A woman in her 50s peered out, her face tight with anxiety. "Welfare check? There must be some mistake. Everything's fine here." Marcus had heard those words countless times in his career. They usually meant everything was not fine at all. "Ma'am, I still need to come in and verify that everyone in the house is safe. It's standard procedure." He held up his badge. "Please remove the chain." The woman hesitated, then slowly closed the door. Marcus heard the chain sliding, and the door opened fully. The woman wore a flowered house dress and tried to smile, but her hands were shaking. "I'm Mrs. Patricia Wells," she said. "My husband Tom is out running errands. We're foster parents. Is this about Jasmine?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat at the name, but he kept his face professional. It was just a coincidence. Jasmine was a common name. Still, his hands felt cold as he took out his notepad. "Yes, we received a concern about your foster daughter. Is she home?" Mrs. Wells wrung her hands. She's upstairs doing homework. She's a troubled girl, detective. Makes up stories, hurts herself for attention. We're doing our best with her, but..." As she spoke, Marcus looked around the living room. Everything was too neat, too perfect, like a stage set rather than a lived-in home. His eyes caught something odd. Fresh scratch marks on the banister leading upstairs, as if someone had been dragged. The memory of his own Jasmine flashed through his mind again. Her 3rd birthday party, just a month before Sarah took her away. She'd worn a pink princess dress and had cake frosting all over her face. Her laugh had filled their whole house with joy. "Ma'am, I need to speak with your foster daughter," Marcus said firmly. "She's not feeling well," Mrs. Wells said quickly. "Maybe you could come back another time?" Marcus straightened to his full height, using his imposing presence to full effect. "That's not an option, Mrs. Wells. Either you take me to her now, or I call for backup and we do this the hard way." Mrs. Wells seemed to deflate. "Follow me," she whispered. As they climbed the stairs, Marcus noticed more signs that worried him: a broken picture frame hastily hidden behind a plant, a small bloodstain on the carpet that someone had tried to clean, a bedroom door with a new lock installed on the outside. His police instincts were screaming now, but something else was bothering him too. A feeling he couldn't explain, like he was walking towards something important. Something that would change everything. At the top of the stairs, Mrs. Wells pointed to a closed door. "She's in there," she said, her voice barely audible. "But detective, please remember, troubled kids often make up stories." Marcus ignored her and reached for the door handle, his heart pounding for reasons he didn't yet understand. Sometimes, a cop's instincts told him when he was about to uncover something big. But this felt different. This felt personal. He turned the handle, and the door slowly opened. The bedroom door creaked open slowly, revealing a small, dark room. The curtains were drawn tight, letting in only thin strips of sunlight. Marcus's eyes adjusted to the darkness as he scanned the space. A single bed sat in the corner, its sheets neat and tight. Too tight, like a military bunk. There was no other furniture except a small dresser. "Jasmine?" Mrs. Wells called out, her voice high and nervous. "The police are here to talk to you." No answer. Marcus stepped into the room, his trained eyes noticing disturbing details. There were scratch marks around the window frame, suggesting it had been nailed shut. A faint smell of bleach hung in the air, too strong for normal cleaning. And most worrying, there were small drops of blood on the baseboard that someone had tried to clean up. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded, turning to Mrs. Wells. The woman's face went pale. She must be hiding. She does this sometimes. Jasmine, come out right now." Marcus heard a tiny sound, almost like a whimper, coming from the closet. He moved toward it slowly, not wanting to frighten the girl inside. The closet door had a lock on the outside, just like the bedroom door. His stomach turned at the sight. "Stay back," he told Mrs. Wells, who was hovering anxiously behind him. He knocked gently on the closet door. "This is Detective Thompson," he said softly. "You're safe now. I'm here to help you." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then a small voice came from inside the closet. Are they gone?" "Mrs. Wells is still here, but she can't hurt you anymore, I promise." Marcus shot a warning look at the foster mother, who took a step back. "Can I open the door?" "Okay," the voice whispered. Marcus turned the lock and opened the closet door slowly. His heart nearly stopped at what he saw. A teenage girl sat huddled in the corner, her knees pulled up to her chest. She wore long sleeves despite the warm day, and her dark hair fell forward, hiding most of her face. But what Marcus could see made his blood boil. A fresh bruise on her cheek, and older ones on her neck. "She's lying," Mrs. Wells suddenly shouted. "Whatever she told you, she's lying. Tom and I are good people. Ma'am," Marcus cut her off, his voice like steel. "Step outside this room right now. Officer Martinez is on his way up to talk to you." This was a bluff. He hadn't called for backup yet, but Mrs. Wells didn't know that. She backed out of the room, her face a mixture of fear and anger. Once she was gone, Marcus knelt down slowly, keeping his distance so the girl wouldn't feel trapped. "My name is Marcus," he said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl lifted her head slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her eyes, dark brown, filled with fear, but also something else. Something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "Jasmine," she whispered. "Jasmine Taylor." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady despite the shock. Taylor? That was Sarah's maiden name. But it couldn't be. Could it? "Jasmine, you're safe now," he repeated. "Can you tell me how long you've been here?" 6 months, she said, her voice getting a little stronger. "Before that, there were other homes, after Mom died." "Your mom?" Marcus couldn't help asking, his heart pounding. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer." Jasmine pushed her hair back from her face, and Marcus had to grip the doorframe to stay steady. He knew that face. It was Sarah's face, but with his own eyes looking back at him. The same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. The same eyes that had looked up at him with love 15 years ago, when he'd held his newborn daughter for the first time. Just then, Marcus heard heavy footsteps downstairs. Mr. Wells must be home. He heard Mrs. Wells's shrill voice. "Tom, the police are here." Marcus made a quick decision. He pulled out his phone and called for immediate backup, then turned back to Jasmine. "I need to deal with something downstairs," he said softly. "But I'm going to have a female officer come up to stay with you. No one is going to hurt you ever again." As he stood up, Jasmine reached out and grabbed his hand. The touch sent a jolt through him. When was the last time someone had held his daughter's hand? "Please don't leave me," she whispered. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I'll be right back," he promised. "And this time, I'm not going anywhere." Marcus heard Tom Wells's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. He quickly turned to Jasmine. "Stay in the closet and lock the door from the inside. Don't open it for anyone except me, understand?" Jasmine nodded, her eyes wide with fear. She quickly closed the closet door, and Marcus heard the soft click of the lock. Tom Wells appeared in the doorway, a big man with meaty hands and an angry red face. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "You can't just barge into our home." Marcus stood at his full height, his badge clearly visible. "Mr. Wells, we've received multiple reports of child abuse. I'm conducting an investigation." "That brat's been telling lies again, hasn't she?" Tom's face got even redder. "Listen, officer." "Detective," Marcus corrected him firmly. "Detective Thompson, and right now, You need to step back and put your hands where I can see them." Instead of complying, Tom took a threatening step forward. "This is my house. You have no right." The sound of sirens cut him off. Marcus had called for backup before coming upstairs, and now he could hear car doors slamming outside. Tom's face changed from anger to fear. "Mr. Wells, put your hands against the wall," Marcus ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. This time, Tom obeyed. Two uniformed officers appeared in the doorway, weapons ready. "Detective Thompson." "Take Mr. Wells downstairs," Marcus instructed. "His wife, too. Keep them separated. And send up Officer Rodriguez. I need a female officer." As the officers led Tom away, Marcus could hear him shouting about lawyers and rights. But Marcus wasn't worried about that. The evidence in this room alone would be enough for an arrest. Officer Maria Rodriguez arrived a few minutes later. She was a veteran cop who had worked with Marcus on many domestic cases. "The girl's in the closet," Marcus told her quietly. "Her name is Jasmine. And Maria." He paused, his voice tight with emotion. "I think she's my daughter." Maria's eyes widened, but she kept her professional composure. "I'll stay with her. You do what you need to do." Marcus knocked gently on the closet door. "Jasmine? It's Detective Thompson. Officer Rodriguez is here to stay with you while I look around. Is that okay?" The door opened slightly, and Jasmine peeked out. She looked at Maria, then back at Marcus and nodded. Marcus started his investigation of the room, taking pictures with his phone. He documented everything: the locked windows, the blood stains, the marks on the walls. In the dresser, he found only 2 sets of clothes. Under the bed, he discovered a hidden diary. With trembling hands, he opened it. The first page made his heart stop. "Dear Mom in heaven, today is my 15th birthday. I wish you were here. I miss you so much. The social worker said you left some letters for me, but the Wells won't let me have them. They say I don't deserve them." Marcus closed the diary and bagged it for evidence. He could hear Jasmine talking softly with Maria in the closet. His daughter, his little girl, had been suffering just miles from where he lived. The thought made him sick. He moved to the hallway and called Captain Johnson. "Cap, I need you down here. And bring someone from Child Services. This is personal." "Personal how, Thompson?" Marcus took a deep breath. "The victim, I have reason to believe she's my daughter. The one Sarah took 12 years ago." There was a long pause. The captain knew Marcus's story. Everyone in the department did. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Johnson said finally. "Don't do anything crazy, Thompson. We'll handle this by the book." "Copy that," Marcus replied, but his hands were shaking as he put away his phone. From downstairs, he could hear Tom Wells shouting again. The man's anger only confirmed what Marcus already knew. Both foster parents would be arrested today. He walked back to the bedroom. Maria had managed to get Jasmine to come out of the closet. The girl sat on the bed now, looking small and fragile in her oversized sweater. When she looked up at him, Marcus saw Sarah's features clearly, the shape of her face, her nose, her chin. But those eyes. Those were his eyes. He had no doubt now. After 12 years of searching, he had found his daughter in the most horrible way possible. "Detective." Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. "What's going to happen to me now?" Marcus fought back tears. "We're going to keep you safe," he promised. "And we're going to figure this out together." He wanted to tell her everything right then, that he was her father, that he had never stopped looking for her, that he had never stopped loving her. But he knew he had to wait. Right now, she needed him to be Detective Thompson, the police officer who was going to protect her. The rest would come later. They had time now, had all the time in the world. Captain Johnson arrived at the house exactly 10 minutes later. By then, both Tom and Patricia Wells were in separate police cars, and crime scene investigators were photographing the house. Upstairs, Jasmine remained with Officer Rodriguez while Marcus briefed his captain in the hallway. "Show me what you got," Johnson said quietly. Marcus handed him the evidence bags containing Jasmine's diary and other items he found. "Look at the birth date in the diary, Cap. December 15th, 2008. That's my daughter's birthday." Johnson flipped through the diary carefully. "Thompson, I know you want this to be her, but we need to be sure. We can't let personal feelings." "There's more," Marcus interrupted. He pulled out his wallet and removed an old photograph. a 3-year-old girl with a bright smile. Look at her left wrist in this photo. The captain looked closely at the picture. A birthmark? Shaped like a tiny heart? Now watch this, Marcus said. He walked back into the bedroom where Jasmine sat talking softly with Officer Rodriguez. Jasmine, could you show the captain your birthmark? The one on your wrist. Jasmine looked confused but slowly pulled up her sleeve. There, on her left wrist, was a small heart-shaped birthmark, identical to the one in the photograph. Captain Johnson's eyes widened. "Mother of God," he whispered. Just then, a woman in a business suit arrived, Susan Chen from Child Services. Marcus had worked with her many times before. She took in the scene quickly and professionally. "Detective Thompson," she said, "I understand we have a sensitive situation here." Marcus nodded. "Miss Chen, I need to show you something." He led her to the hallway and explained everything: the birthmark, the diary, the birthday. As he talked, tears finally began rolling down his face. "I never stopped looking for her," he said, his voice breaking. "Every year on her birthday, I would light a candle and pray she was safe. And all this time." Susan placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Marcus, we need to handle this carefully. She's been through trauma. Finding out you're her father, it's going to be a lot for her to process." Back in the bedroom, Jasmine was looking through her diary, which Captain Johnson had returned to her. She looked up as they entered. "These people," she said quietly, "they told me my father abandoned us, that he didn't want me. Is that true?" Marcus couldn't hold back anymore. He knelt down in front of her, keeping a respectful distance. "Jasmine, I need to tell you something important. 12 years ago, your mother took you away. I never knew where you went. I've been searching for you ever since." Jasmine's eyes grew wide. "What? What are you saying?" Marcus pulled out his wallet again and showed her the photograph. "This was taken on your 3rd birthday. Look at your wrist in the picture." Jasmine stared at the photo, then at her birthmark. Her hands started shaking. You're my father?" Marcus nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I never abandoned you, Jasmine. I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you." The room was completely silent. Officer Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes. Captain Johnson cleared his throat and looked away. Susan Chen watched carefully, ready to step in if needed. Jasmine touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "I remember this dress," she whispered. "Mom kept it in a box. She used to cry when she looked at it." "Did she?" Marcus hesitated. "Did she ever talk about me?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "Before she died, she wrote me letters. She said she made a mistake taking me away. She said you were a good man." She looked up at him, his eyes filled with tears. "The Wells wouldn't let me read the letters. They tore them up." Marcus felt a surge of anger, quickly replaced by deep sadness. Sarah had realized her mistake too late, but at least she had tried to tell their daughter the truth. "Jasmine," he said softly, "I know this is overwhelming. We don't have to figure everything out right now, but I want you to know that you're safe. And if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your life again." For a long moment, Jasmine just stared at the photograph. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Marcus's hand. The same small gesture she had made earlier, but now with a whole new meaning. "Dad," she whispered, testing the word. And in that moment, 12 years of pain and searching suddenly felt worth it. His daughter had found her way back to him, against all odds. "I'm here," he answered softly. "I'm right here." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Wells were taken to the police station for booking, and crime scene investigators continued gathering evidence from the house. But for Marcus, everything centered on the small room at the local Children's Advocacy Center, where Jasmine sat telling her story to a specialist. Marcus watched through a one-way mirror, his heart breaking with each word. Department policy wouldn't let him be in the room during her official statement, but nothing could make him leave that observation area. "Can you tell me about your mom?" the interviewer, Dr. Sarah Mills, asked gently. Jasmine pulled her knees up to her chest, a habit Marcus had noticed she did when feeling vulnerable. "Mom got sick when I was 10, she said quietly. "Cancer. Before she died, she told me the truth about my dad." "What did she tell you?" "She said she was wrong to take me away, that she was scared and angry because Dad worked dangerous cases and she couldn't handle the worry anymore. Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. She wrote me letters explaining everything. She wanted me to find him after she died. Behind the mirror, Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. Sarah had tried to make things right in the end. If only she had reached out to him sooner. "What happened after your mother passed away?" Dr. Mills asked. "I went into foster care. The first two families were okay, but they couldn't keep me long-term." Jasmine's voice grew softer. "Then I went to the Wells. At first, they seemed nice. But then..." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing bruises in various stages of healing. "Mr. Wells would get angry if I asked about my dad or my mom's letters. He said I was ungrateful, that nobody would want a troubled kid like me. Mrs. Wells would just watch and say nothing." In the observation room, Captain Johnson put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We got them, Thompson. They'll never hurt another child." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. The Wells had fostered 6 other children before Jasmine. How many others had they hurt? "Did you try to tell anyone?" Dr. Mills asked. "Once. I told my teacher, but Mrs. Wells convinced everyone I was lying for attention." Jasmine's voice trembled. "They took away my phone. Nailed my window shut. Said if I tried to tell anyone else, they'd make sure I went somewhere worse." Marcus had to step away for a moment, his hands shaking with rage. Captain Johnson followed him into the hallway. "The DA's reviewing the evidence now," Johnson said. "With Jasmine's statement and what we found in the house, the Wells are looking at serious time." "What about the social worker who placed her there?" Marcus asked. "They had complaints before. Why wasn't anything done?" "We're investigating that too." Johnson paused. "Marcus, about Jasmine. Susan Chen is fast-tracking your custody application. Given the circumstances, and with your background check already clear." Marcus looked back through the window at his daughter. "What if she doesn't want to stay with me, after everything she's been through?" "Detective Thompson." Dr. Mills had stepped out of the interview room. "Jasmine's asking for you." Marcus entered the room slowly. Jasmine looked exhausted, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. "Hey," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "Is it true?" she asked. "About me maybe coming to live with you?" Marcus nodded. "Only if you want to. We can take things slow, figure it out together." "The Wells," she hesitated. "They won't be able to hurt anyone else?" "No," Marcus assured her firmly. "They're going to prison for a long time." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, playing with the sleeve of her sweater. Then she looked up at him with those familiar eyes, his eyes. "Mom said you were a good cop," she said. "That you helped people. That's why you worked so much. You were trying to protect people." Marcus felt tears forming again. "I tried, but I should have protected you and your mom better." "It wasn't your fault," Jasmine said quietly. "Mom wrote that in her letters. She said she was wrong to take me away. She was scared because she loved you too much, and she couldn't handle worrying about you getting hurt." Marcus reached across the table slowly, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. After a moment, Jasmine put her hand in his. "I have a spare room," he said softly. "It's not much, but we could decorate it however you want. Make it yours." "Could it be purple?" Jasmine asked, a hint of hope in her voice. That was Mom's favorite color. Marcus smiled through his tears. "It can be any color you want. We got a lot of lost time to make up for." For the first time that day, Jasmine's smile reached her eyes. "We can start now." "Yeah, baby girl," Marcus whispered. "We can start right now." 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing day. Marcus sat in the courtroom, watching as Tom and Patricia Wells stood before the judge for their sentencing hearing. Beside him, Jasmine held his hand tightly, her other hand clutching a small purple notebook, her new diary. The prosecutor stood up, her voice firm and clear. "Your Honor, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. Multiple counts of child abuse, neglect, and false imprisonment. The defendants not only harmed their foster daughter, but deliberately destroyed letters from her deceased mother, letters that would have reunited her with her biological father, Detective Marcus Thompson." Marcus felt Jasmine's hand tighten in his. They had discovered that the Wells had received several letters from social services over the years, including information about Marcus searching for his daughter. They had hidden everything. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes but a stern expression, looked down at the Wells. Would the defendants like to make a statement before sentencing? Tom Wells stood up, his orange prison jumpsuit making him look smaller than Marcus remembered. Your Honor, we were trying to protect the girl. She was troubled. No. Jasmine's voice rang out clear and strong. She had asked to speak at the sentencing, and now she stood, her hand still holding her father's. I wasn't troubled. I was grieving for my mom and looking for my dad. You kept us apart on purpose. The judge nodded at Jasmine. Thank you for your courage, young lady. She turned back to the Wells, her face hard. I've been a judge for 30 years, and cases like this sicken me. You were trusted to protect vulnerable children. Instead, you abused that trust in the worst possible way. Patricia Wells began to cry, but the judge continued. Tom and Patricia Wells, I hereby sentence you each to 15 years in state prison. Additionally, you are permanently barred from fostering or working with children in any capacity. The gavel struck, and it was done. As the Wells were led away in handcuffs, Marcus saw Jasmine release a long breath, like she'd been holding it for months. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded. Can we go home now? Home. The word still made Marcus's heart jump. For the past 3 weeks, Jasmine had been living with him in his apartment. They were slowly figuring things out together. Outside the courthouse, Captain Johnson waited for them. How'd it go? 15 years, Marcus replied. Each. Johnson nodded approvingly. Good. Oh, and Thompson? That transfer you requested came through. You start Desk 2V next week. Jasmine looked up at Marcus in surprise. You're not going to be a detective anymore? Marcus smiled at his daughter. I'll still be a detective, but I'm taking an assignment that doesn't involve field work. No more dangerous cases. No more late-night calls. But you love being out in the field, Jasmine protested. Mom's letter said that's what made you a great cop. Helping people directly. Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes, their eyes. I love being a cop, but I love being your dad more. I missed 12 years. I'm not missing any more. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she hugged him tight. Captain Johnson quietly walked away, giving them privacy. Later that evening, Marcus and Jasmine sat in her newly decorated room. The walls were a soft purple, and photos covered one wall. Old pictures Marcus had kept of Jasmine as a baby, new ones they'd taken together over the past weeks, and in the center, the last photo ever taken of Sarah, smiling bravely despite her illness. Dad, Jasmine asked, sitting on her new bed, do you think Mom would be happy about us finding each other? Marcus looked at Sarah's photo. Despite everything that had happened between them, he knew she had loved their daughter fiercely. Yeah, baby girl, I think she'd be very happy. He pulled out an envelope from his pocket. The social workers found this in the Wells attic yesterday. It's the last letter your mom wrote you. Jasmine took the envelope with trembling hands. Will you read it with me? Marcus sat beside her as she opened the letter. Together, they read Sarah's final words. Her regret, her love, her hope that her daughter and the man she had once loved would find each other again. When they finished reading, Jasmine leaned against her father's shoulder. I miss her, she whispered. Me too, Marcus said softly. But we're going to be okay. We got each other now. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the purple walls with golden light. In this room that represented new beginnings, a father and daughter sat together, healing old wounds and building new memories. Sometimes, Marcus realized, justice wasn't just about punishment. Sometimes it was about second chances, about finding what was lost, making things right again. And sometimes it was as simple as a father and daughter, together at last, watching the sun set through a window that would never be nailed shut again. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing day. Marcus sat in the courtroom, watching as Tom and Patricia Wells stood before the judge for their sentencing hearing. Beside him, Jasmine held his hand tightly, her other hand clutching a small purple notebook, her new diary. The prosecutor stood up, her voice firm and clear. Your Honor, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. Multiple counts of child abuse, neglect, and false imprisonment. The defendants not only harmed their foster daughter, but deliberately destroyed letters from her deceased mother, letters that would have reunited her with her biological father, Detective Marcus Thompson. Marcus felt Jasmine's hand tighten in his. They had discovered that the Wells had received several letters from social services over the years, including information about Marcus searching for his daughter. They had hidden everything. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes but a stern expression, looked down at the Wells. Would the defendants like to make a statement before sentencing? Tom Wells stood up, his orange prison jumpsuit making him look smaller than Marcus remembered. Your Honor, we were trying to protect the girl. She was troubled. No. Jasmine's voice rang out clear and strong. She had asked to speak at the sentencing, and now she stood, her hand still holding her father's. I wasn't troubled. I was grieving for my mom and looking for my dad. You kept us apart on purpose. The judge nodded at Jasmine. Thank you for your courage, young lady. She turned back to the Wells, her face hard. I've been a judge for 30 years, and cases like this sicken me. You were trusted to protect vulnerable children. Instead, you abused that trust in the worst possible way. Patricia Wells began to cry, but the judge continued. Tom and Patricia Wells, I hereby sentence you each to 15 years in state prison. Additionally, you are permanently barred from fostering or working with children in any capacity. The gavel struck, and it was done. As the Wells were led away in handcuffs, Marcus saw Jasmine release a long breath, like she'd been holding it for months. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded. Can we go home now? Home. The word still made Marcus's heart jump. For the past 3 weeks, Jasmine had been living with him in his apartment. They were slowly figuring things out together. Outside the courthouse, Captain Johnson waited for them. How'd it go? 15 years, Marcus replied. Each. Johnson nodded approvingly. Good. Oh, and Thompson, that transfer you requested came through. You start desk duty next week. Jasmine looked up at Marcus in surprise. You're not going to be a detective anymore? Marcus smiled at his daughter. I'll still be a detective, but I'm taking an assignment that doesn't involve field work. No more dangerous cases. No more late-night calls. But you love being out in the field, Jasmine protested. Mom's letter said that's what made you a great cop. Helping people directly. Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes, their eyes. I love being a cop, but I love being your dad more. I missed 12 years. I'm not missing anymore. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she hugged him tight. Captain Johnson quietly walked away, giving them privacy. Later that evening, Marcus and Jasmine sat in her newly decorated room. The walls were a soft purple, and photos covered one wall. Old pictures Marcus had kept of Jasmine as a baby, new ones they'd taken together over the past weeks, and in the center, the last photo ever taken of Sarah, smiling bravely despite her illness. Dad, Jasmine asked, sitting on her new bed, do you think Mom would be happy about us finding each other? Marcus looked at Sarah's photo. Despite everything that had happened between them, he knew she had loved their daughter fiercely. Yeah, baby girl, I think she'd be very happy. He pulled out an envelope from his pocket. The social workers found this in the Wells attic yesterday. It's the last letter your mom wrote you. Jasmine took the envelope with trembling hands. Will you read it with me? Marcus sat beside her as she opened the letter. Together, it read Sarah's final words, her regret, her love, her hope that her daughter and the man she had once loved would find each other again. When they finished reading, Jasmine leaned against her father's shoulder. I miss her, she whispered. Me too, Marcus said softly, but we're going to be okay. We got each other now. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the purple walls with golden light. In this room that represented new beginnings, a father and daughter sat together, healing old wounds and building new memories. Marcus thought carefully before answering. I wish we hadn't lost those years together, but maybe we needed that time apart to become who we are now. Your mom helped make you strong, and my search for you helped make me better. Now we can take the best parts of our past and build something new. Jasmine leaned against his shoulder, just like her mother used to do. I love you, Dad. I love you too, baby girl, Marcus replied, holding his daughter close. Always have, always will. Above them, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victories, new memories to add to their wall. But for now, they were content just to be together, a father and daughter who had found their way back to each other, proving that even the longest road can lead to the perfect destination.